Good afternoon and welcome to today's McGill News webcast, Tick Talk, Understanding and Preventing Tick-Borne Illnesses. My name is Derek Kassoff, Managing Director of Communications at McGill's Office of University Advancement, and it's Tuesday, July 16th, 2024. Summer is here. The days are long, the temperatures are on the rise, and other than binging season 3 of The Bear, there is very little reason to stay indoors. But before you grab your hat and slather on the sunscreen, be warned that danger might be lurking around the corner, or more specifically, in the blades of your favorite patch of grass, in the form of ticks, whose bites can transmit Lyme disease and other infections. In fact, reported cases of Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses have more than doubled in North America in the last 20 years, keeping public health authorities scurrying for answers. Joining me today to discuss the alarming rise of tick-borne diseases and to offer up some tips on how to keep yourself and your loved ones safe this summer are a pair of experts who are devoting their professional careers to understanding the spread of tick-borne illnesses and their implications on our health. Let me introduce them. Kirsten Crandall is an expert scientific advisor at the Institut National de Santé du Québec, as well as a three-time McGill graduate with a PhD in biology. And Dr. Momar Ndao is an associate professor in McGill's Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, Division of Infectious Diseases. He is the co-director of the McGill Interdisciplinary Initiative in Infection and Immunity, has served as director of the Canadian National Reference Center for Parasitology since 2002, and has been the vice president of the World Federation of Parasitologists since 2022. Dr. Ndao completed his veterinary studies in Senegal and a diploma in tropical medicine, as well as MSc and PhD degrees in international health and tropical diseases at the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp. Thank you both for joining me today. And before we get started, a quick note that if you are watching us live and have questions for either of our panelists, you can send them to us by email at aoc@mcgill.ca, and I'll do my best to address them to our guests. So before we jump into questions around Lyme disease, let's get to know our two guests a little bit better and what drives their passion for their work. Kirsten, according to your Twitter or X account, you are a self-described tick enthusiast. How does one get enthusiastic about ticks, and why do you find them to be such fascinating creatures?
So ticks in the beginning, they really scared me. And through that fear, I started becoming fascinated with how they moved through the world, how they interacted with different animals and specifically mammals. As I'm an ecologist, I really love mammals. And so just learning how they go about in the environment was really fascinating. To see that a creature so small can have such an impact was really what made me enthusiastic about this topic.
Wow, well, I'm sure you're going to share a lot more knowledge with us in the next few minutes about ticks, the good and I guess the bad. We'll get back to that in a minute. Dr. Ndao, you grew up in Senegal in West Africa before moving on to Belgium to complete your studies in parasitology, which I should mention looks at the relationship between parasites and the diseases they transmit to their human hosts. I understand you first got interested in this field of study because of a very personal situation. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Derek. So I born in a village in Senegal, Kaolack. There was no electricity, no running water, and I have to tell that my mom was blind to a parasite. During that time, also my uncle passed away to a parasite infection. My dad never been to school, but he was a taxi driver. At the age of 6, I moved to Dakar, the capital, where I started the school, and later on to the vet school, and I moved to Antwerp, as you mentioned at the beginning. So I was very passionate about parasitic disease because I have a family member, relatives, siblings living in this tropical area, be infected and misdiagnosed with the disease until they pass away. So I don't know I have the solution, but I'm going to contribute since I moved to Canada, this great country, La Belle Province, being at McGill, surrounded by great people. And it's a privilege for me to be here and to interact with you guys. Thank you.
Great. So it sounds like you may not have all the solutions, but you certainly have the passion. So we'll talk about that. So maybe I'll stick with you for the next question, Dr. Ndao, and maybe start at the very basic. The basic question was, what is Lyme disease and how do humans catch it?
Yeah, Lyme, to say in a really basic way, it's just transmitted by the tick but the tick should be infected, absolutely. And usually be attached, ideally for more than 24 hours. And that transmit the bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi. So it is transmitted by the black-legged ticks or deer ticks. If you need to know, the scientific name is Ixodes scapularis. Those are the ticks transmit the ticks in North America. Before feeding, they're really small, 1 millimeter to 3, the size of the nymph, which is really small, like a poppy seed. But when it's attached and finish their feeding, as in the adult, it's like the seed bigger. This is how people get Lyme disease, by the bite of the infected tick.
Okay. Now, Kirsten, I mentioned at the opening of the webcast that cases of Lyme disease have more than doubled in North America in the last 2 decades. Why is that? Is that because we're doing more testing, or are ticks, in fact, spreading into new areas and therefore exposing more people to their bites?
So it is due to that geographic expansion of where infected ticks with that bacteria are located. So the first cases of Lyme disease were found in the United States in Lyme, Connecticut in the 1970s. Since then, the tick population started to spread by the movement of hosts throughout the northeastern states. And as it got closer and closer to Canada, that's when we started finding populations of those black-legged ticks in the different provinces, where most of the provinces that are greatly affected today are the ones where the ticks were first located. So in Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia. And with the warmer temperatures, because of climate change, it's affecting host movements more and more. So those larger mammal populations are bringing them further northward, but tick populations are also being brought further northward by migratory bird movements. So the birds, as they're going further and further north into their different migratory routes, that's how we see tick populations arrive for the first point and then become established.
Great. So let me just stick with you for 1 second, Kirsten. I'm curious about one thing, and you're talking about the spread and the size of tick populations. How do you count that? I mean, I assume you're not out in the field counting individual ticks. I mean, what is the scientific process in place to figure out, the increase in tick populations?
Mm-hmm. So we use different forms of surveillance. One of those forms actually is going in and counting not individual ticks, but going into different forested areas or areas that are close to where human populations do recreational activities. And that is called active surveillance, where the different people will go out into the field or the forest and collect ticks on a piece of flannel. Since the ticks don't have eyes, they feel the flannel and they want to grab onto it, where they're questing or they're dancing, as I like to say. The other form where we get a lot of information as to the really big extent of where these different populations are is called passive surveillance. And this is done through people voluntarily submitting, doctors and vets voluntarily submitting tick specimens that have been on a human or have been on an animal, and that we receive in public health, and we determine where they were located, and it helps us to determine where the populations may be found in Quebec, but this is also done across all provinces in Canada and in the US as well.
Wow, an interesting approach, of course. So on the subject of global warming, maybe I'll turn back to you, Dr. Ndao. I was actually just reading research that just came out from McGill earlier this month. They did a study of something like 26,000 species in the world and suggested that nearly 60% of the world's species are shifting towards cooler environments as a result of climate change, and that this is most pronounced in Europe and North America. So Dr. Ndao, as someone who studies parasitology, does this suggest that those of us who live in northern, non-tropical climates have to get used to a whole new range of bugs and insects and the infectious diseases that they potentially carry with them?
Yes, I think when I read also the editorial that written by Catherine Gambay at the Media Regulation Office about this climate change, there is a real shift in the range of mosquito and disease-bearing ticks also, and other pathogen vectors. They can introduce such kind of malaria and Lyme disease. A good example we forget maybe the case of Western Nile. in the past. We have to remember that malaria was endemic in Canada for years before it was eradicated. And we still have the competent vector within Canada. So just an example, if anyone, you, me, Derek, Kristen, decided to go to a tropic countries, come back with low parasitemia, but we have the competent vector, this mosquito can bite people and infect people who never been outside Canada. Last year, there was kind of pathogen transmission outbreak of malaria in USA. And also there is some hybridization also. If you look for some parasite also, schistosomiasis, for example, there was kind of outbreak of schistosoma in Corsica in Europe, and it's not the same thing. But one example that is getting through endemic countries and coming to non-endemic countries. Yes, climate change might change the dynamic of pathogen from the endemic area to non-endemic area. People have to be aware. And the healthcare system have to be prepared also to deal with the shift of the dynamic range of infectious disease.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, it's good to know, and I guess good to think about. And I do have a few questions about how the healthcare system might be preparing for this. So we'll get to that hopefully during this conversation as well. But let's stick to the immediacy of the moment. Here we are in July, and Kirsten, summer's here. I've already done my season 3 of The Bear. I won't even comment on that. We're definitely spending more time outdoors. So what should we as individuals be thinking about as we seek to stay safe and avoid tick bites? Are there specific areas we should avoid going into or times of the day when we need to be extra cautious?
So for Lyme disease or other tick-borne diseases, the best thing to do is prevent a tick bite in order to not contract one of these diseases. So in order to prevent these tick bites, there's several individual measures that we can take as preventative measures. Going into areas, if you like hiking, you can still go into those areas, but remaining on the trail is areas where you're not as likely to encounter a tick because you're not going into their favorite habitat. Usually it's a gravel or a beaten down trail. Otherwise, it would be wearing long pants and wearing a long sleeve shirt, using different insect repellents that to each person's desire, if you would like to use DEET or other non-chemical repellents. And then as well, making sure that your pants are tucked into your socks. And the most important is also doing a tick check, which is basically checking all over your body after you come in from outdoor activities. This doesn't have to be limited to when you go out hiking in a forest. It can be just if you were gardening in your backyard. It's something good to do where you look all over your body, especially in crevices or darker areas, because ticks like those areas the most. And then there's also certain preventative measures that can be discussed with vets for your animals as well. Ticks tend to be active mostly throughout the midday. They need really humid environments. So not when there's huge downpours, but when it's humid out and when it's hot out, they're most active and they tend to be a little bit quicker in those kinds of environments. I think that covers everything.
So just a quick follow-up question for you. You mentioned sort of staying, on trails and paths and, not on the main track. Are ticks sort of opportunistic predators? Like I feel like mosquitoes, wherever I go, they're chasing me. They sense me, they're hungry. Are ticks in that same category of opportunistic, or if you sort of leave them to their own, they won't bother humans?
So as I said before, I think ticks don't have eyes, so they're relying on other sensory receptors in order to figure out if a human is nearby or another host, like an animal. So they're trying to pick up your carbon dioxide. So that's why if they feel that there's carbon dioxide in the area that's related to a host, they'll become very active and will start dancing a lot more in order to find them. Ticks by themselves don't walk very far. They don't jump out of trees, so they're really on the ground or on low-lying vegetation. And that's where they'll be trying to find their hosts. So they can't see them, they're just really sensing them. Mosquitoes have a lot of a lot of different receptors. Ticks don't have as many, but they're still using that carbon dioxide to try and localize where their next meal is.
Okay, and this is going to sound like a stupid question, but ticks don't fly, right? Mosquitoes fly. Ticks don't fly, right?
No, they really rely on the when they're doing these large distance movements, they're really relying on their hosts. Otherwise, they don't travel very far whatsoever. It's only a couple of a few meters outside of their zone because they're so small, it takes them a long time.
Okay, good to know. I guess if something comes flying towards my face, it's not a tick. Dr. Ndao, I mean, do all ticks carry Lyme disease or other dangerous infections, or are there just those ticks that have been infected?
Yeah, this is not all tick. Okay, it's not all ticks that carry Lyme disease. I just want also to add on what we said about the climate change also before coming to the questions. Yeah, with global warming, as you see, we did a study also between Quebec and Vermont. Kind of joke, we say people can build a fence, but tick can always pass through. And especially the birds, they can help them to travel even far away. It's not all ticks that carry Lyme disease. In Canada, there is more than 40 types of tick living in Canada, but only 2 spread the disease. The black-legged ticks, but there is a one more common to British Columbia. In Quebec, maybe Kirsten can add more, there are 1,000 species of tick. But again, the well-known that carry Lyme disease is the black-legged ticks. It's called That's the one.
Okay. So just because you've been bitten by a tick, I mean, obviously you need to, we'll talk about the protocol there, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've been infected. It means
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
So that's
yeah. Okay.
I can speak to that just very quickly.
Yeah.
In very high risk areas or what we call endemic areas, only about 1 in 3 ticks are infected. So even if you're in those high risk areas that have a higher percentage of having that bacteria, you're not always going to be bit by an infected tick.
Okay. Yeah. So, Kirsten, can you walk us through what you should do when you get home? We talked about sort of being out and recreationally in grass and fields. How does one check themselves for ticks when they get home? And should
Mhm.
this be a regular thing that we do in the summer months?
It's something that I say should be done everywhere where you go through you complete those outdoor activities. However, if you live or are going into recreational areas that are in those high risk areas, and that's not just in Quebec, but anywhere in Canada or in the US, it's really important to verify when you get home. As Dr. Ndao said, it takes about 24 hours for the bacteria to be transmitted. So in that period of time, even if the tick is biting you, if you're able to see it when you come back from your activities, you can remove it, and the chances are much, much lower that you may contract disease if the tick was infected. So what I typically would do when I came in from field work was I would put all my clothing into the dryer first because they're really not good with hot heat. So I would put it on the highest heat setting for an hour, and then I would wash my clothes as normal. Otherwise, for myself, I would check all locations of my body. If I can't check my back myself, I would have someone else do it or use a mirror. And then the other thing that's really important is to take a bath or a shower almost immediately when you arrive because the tick may not actually be attached yet. And when you take that shower or bath, you may wash the tick off already.
And if you find a tick on your body, I understand there's a very specific way that you need to remove it, correct? Can you tell us about that?
Mm-hmm. So the only way a tick should be removed from your body is with sharp tweezers or tick lasso sometimes is what's used, where you're trying to remove the tick in its entirety, including its head and mouth parts, in order to make sure nothing is left behind on the skin where the bite was happening. And this technique is really necessary because if the tick is irritated as it's being removed, it can try to expel its stomach contents where those pathogens are located. So in order to make sure it's a clean removal, you take the tweezers, you remove them, and it's also important to keep the tick because you don't know if the tick was infected or not. So it's good to keep the tick in that if you have symptoms that appear in the days following, you're able to bring the tick specimen to your doctor in order to see what kind of tick it was.
Okay. Now, Dr. Ndao, can you explain a little bit about the biology of Lyme disease? I'm curious what happens if you've been bitten by an infected tick. What are sort of the steps of infection as this pathogen moves into your body?
Yeah, so I think Dr. Kirsten already mentioned it also. Lyme was first recognized in the 1976 in clinical children infected and having some inflammatory. In these patients also, they have erythema migrans and some symptoms including meningitis, hepatitis. But there is two main steps that people have to think about it. And some cases that are overlap. And these symptoms are not very, very specific. Joints involvement, central nerve involvement. But the first stage is the early localization of the Lyme disease, which takes weeks 1 through to 4. And you have the second one, which is the early disseminated Lyme, month to 4, but the late and late dissemination, which is just the late Lyme disease, that can go up to years. People can develop antibody, but they have to remember this antibody are not protective. You can have antibody, a lot of antibody, but be reinfected also with when you get the tick bite, infected tick bite. So those are the 3 steps. Early localization of the skin, dissemination, and late dissemination, and that will take years.
Oh, okay. So let me ask you another question, Dr. Ndao. There's been a lot of concern, I guess, in the patient community about, how difficult it is to diagnose Lyme disease. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, why has it been so difficult to diagnose it, and why are there sort of common misdiagnoses? And is that starting to change as the medical community is becoming more aware of the presence of ticks and Lyme disease? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, again, as we mentioned right at the beginning, it's not because you get a tick bite, you have Lyme disease. It's not all ticks carry Borrelia. That's one. Second, you can be bitten by a tick, but if the tick is bitten and removed quickly, the probability of getting Lyme is extremely low. If it's more than 24 hours, yes, if the tick is really infected. First of all, there's some direct methods you can do. People can do some culture. Synovate, you can take the liquid synovial and culture it. But these things are not very, very sensitive. The indirect method that the CDC, Health Canada, all Prov Lab in Canada use is the 2 testing. ELISA as a screening and Western blot as a confirmatory testing. The challenge is absolutely the false positive for Lyme. DNA testing using PCR is another tool that people use, but there is some FDA tests that already approved, it's recent, that use, I'm not going to go in details, but they use a measured protein-like sequencing from the parasite, the bacteria, and also the C3 peptide was found. Those are the 2 tests FDA approved that people can use now. People are working really hard. I'll explain it later, maybe, if I have a time, about what VectorNet is doing right now to help diagnose Lyme disease and other pathogens that can be transmitted via the ticks.
Okay. And yes, I do want to ask you in a minute about VectorNet, but before we get to that, let me turn it back to you, Kirsten. We talked a lot about Lyme disease in the last 25 minutes or so. But I understand that's just one of several tick-borne illnesses we ought to be worried about. I was just reading this weekend, several people actually who were aware I was doing this webcast sent me an article from the CBC about a woman in Ottawa, I think, who passed away of Powassan virus, which I'd never heard about.
Mhm.
So, what are some of the other illnesses that we need to be concerned about and thinking about besides Lyme disease?
Yes, so the big four diseases that we're looking at right now for tick-borne diseases is Lyme disease is the biggest. It's the one that we've known about the longest. It's been established the longest. But we're now starting to see anaplasmosis is becoming more and more. It's endemic in a certain pocket in southern Quebec right now, but we don't know the extent 100% of where it's localized. And these cases are also rising in other parts of Canada as well as in the US. The next disease and that's caused by a bacteria called anaplasma. It's sort of it's a bacteria just like Borrelia for Lyme disease. The next disease is babesiosis, which is a parasite Babesia, which is also starting to occur a bit more frequently, especially in the US. But in Quebec, we had our first locally acquired case last year. And so we're trying to figure out as well where that's located in order to inform the public. And finally, Powassan virus has been located in Canada for a long time, but it's still relatively rare, but it does appear in certain pockets. Again, we had our first locally acquired case in Quebec last year. And it's a little bit more difficult because it's a virus, so it doesn't it doesn't it doesn't react in the same ways to treatment as the other diseases, but it's one that we're looking out for as well. So for us at Quebec Public Health, we're starting to look at surveillance, not just of Lyme disease now, but really to open it up to all of these other emerging tick-borne illnesses in order to be proactive and not reactive, and help out the public as much as we can.
Okay, scary but interesting.
After that, also being part of the tick-borne group of the CPHN, which is a Canadian Parasitology network landscape. And yes, in Quebec, maybe anaplasma is still a concern, but I can tell the rest of Canada, the prevalence is anaplasma is really high. I can't name the prevalence right now, but it's a big concern in Canada. So how she say is the ticks, and I mentioned it previously, they don't only carry Borrelia, they have other pathogens. Babesia is a parasite. She mentioned Powassan, but there is also Ehrlichia, another bacteria. So that's why also being in the vector net, we're trying to develop some assay, we're going to talk about it after, that can target multiple pathogens for the one shot. We want to do some one-stop shopping to detect other pathogens that tick might carry and infect people.
Mm-hmm. So on that subject, Dr. Ndao, I know you want to talk about VectorNet. So let me ask you about that. That's a project that's being developed here in Montreal at the MUHC. And I mean, I'm sure you'll tell us a little bit about it. One of the, my understanding is one of the pieces they're trying to work at is to develop sort of a rapid test like we have for COVID that would be available at a pharmacy. Is that something that is close to development? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Okay. Yeah, the VectorNet was an idea that emerged by a group of people, including me, David Langley, Dr. Martin Olivier, and Christian Pada, where we get funding through the MI4 MHC. By the way, I'm just thank them a lot also. And the first support we received was, of course, through the foundation, what we're asking for more than what we got. But that was through the Jane Edward Foundation and Howard Epps-White Foundation, through also this really help. What we want to develop here is something we want to patent it, also protect it, is ABLE, which is the Ableplex. Anaplasma for the A, B for Babesia, L for Lyme disease, and E for Ehrlichia. We're going to add Powassan later on. So we want to develop something extremely simple, like the COVID test rapid assay, pregnant assay that people can even get to at the pharmacy, doing them by themselves. at the first point. This is it. We are a little bit far away for the anaplasma. I think, I mentioned the public health Canada. We can culture the pathogen at the MHC. Babesia is the same, and Lyme disease, Borrelia is the same. We're working through Ehrlichia and also. But those three pathogens, we tackle them, we have them, and we're offering Babesia also as a routine diagnosis assay, PCR and serology for years and years. So what we need, Derek, and also from the public, is support to develop this assay. We're working through, we are seeking money through the foundation, and VectorNet MI4 is helping. So we are working extremely hard, even going to the field to collect tick, dissect them, and culture the parasite, the pathogen they have, what we can detect, and put them in develop some new assay.
Okay. Now, what about, I also understand there's work underway to develop a Canada-wide tick screening program. What would that look like, and how significant would that be in our battle against Lyme disease and other illnesses?
Yeah, what we do is I think Kirsten might do the same things. With the program, we're able to send a poster and the people in the field, and also we work with the public health agency where we collect the tick, and also we're receiving some tick, thank to the LSPQ also. And also what we did a survey and sent memo to all veterinary clinics also across Quebec. So when they receive tick, they still send it to the MHC. So they can tick out alive. They can be alive for weeks. So we dissected them and we put them in culture. So this is kind of active surveillance bracket and trying to dissect and, this stuff is going deeper and trying to get understanding tool. Also, we're doing some genotyping, sequencing also to get, the library, everything, that tick can carry. But we are focusing, honestly, to those 5 for now because we can do everything, which is Anaplasma, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Borrelia, and Powasam for now.
Right. Geez, I think I'm going to just stay home or indoors. Again, if you're watching us live and you have any questions for our two incredible panelists, you can send them to us by email at aoc@mcgill.ca. And in fact, let's turn our attention to some of the questions. We've got a pile of questions that have come in, some before we went live and many that have been coming in every couple of minutes since we've been live. So, Kirsten, maybe I'll put the first one or two to you. So we got an email from Donald Patrickin. He was asking about, you talked on this earlier, but about what clothing to wear. So is there, I guess the question is, do ticks bite through clothing? And is there specific clothing Donald's asking about that you should wear or avoid if you're going into an area that you think might be infested with ticks?
So very thin clothing, they can still most likely bite through. Sort of like if a mosquito can bite you through clothing, a tick can most likely bite you through clothing as well a little bit. Other than that, in the United States, there's a chemical product named permethrin that is coated on clothing there, but it has not been approved for Canada yet. Certain outdoor retailers do have clothing that's being marketed as mosquito repellent clothing and uses insect repellents that could cover ticks as well. So very high quality clothing that has that repellent sort of already permeated within the clothing. As well, wearing light clothing is really helpful because it's a lot easier to spot the little ticks on very light colored clothing rather than on dark colored pants or a dark colored shirt. It'll be easier to see them walking on you as well.
Okay. So we actually received, Donald had sent in a second question about insect repellents and asking about whether DEET, which is an active ingredient in repellents, works and what is the best strength percentage we should aim for. And we also got a question from Julie Vanek, who is writing, she has a cabin in northern Minnesota and asked specifically about permethrin, which apparently she can't use because cats are allergic to it or it's dangerous for cats. So is there a specific insect repellent one should be thinking about when you're thinking about avoiding ticks?
So it's also when you're thinking about insect repellent, it's also a personal decision. So a lot of these insect repellents can be have a lot of chemical product in them. So DEET is really well known to be one of the sort of gold standard insect repellents to be used with ticks, at least 20% DEET. However, it comes with the fact that we know DEET can cause some issues in humans. So it's really taking that choice whether you would like to use it or not. Other chemical insect repellents include picaridin, icaridin. There are certain sort of non-chemical insect repellents that can be used, such as oil of lemon eucalyptus, and which I think in Canada is listed as Natrapel. However, I just saw recently that the CDC has a sort of a tool where you can look at different insect repellents and see how long they should last when you need to reapply. That is extremely beneficial, and it provides sort of that information if you would like really detail-oriented information about your insect repellents. Permethrin is highly toxic to cats, and that's why it's not usually used if you have cats at because it can cause issues. For myself, I made sure I wouldn't touch my animals if I had any of those insect repellents on me because they can be highly toxic to them. And for animals also, it's much better to potentially talk to your vet about putting them on a preventive medication than giving them any insect repellent because we have no idea how these repellents can affect these animals, especially domestic animals like cats and dogs. So it's all things to take into account and make your decision based on how you would like to use those different either chemical or non-chemical properties.
Okay, great. And like I said, we should quite a few questions about insect repellents and dogs and cats in particular as well. So I think we've covered quite a bit of that with that answer. Thank you, Kirsten. Dr. Ndao, maybe I'll put the next question to you. This one came from John Palov. So he's asking about what should someone do if they have been bitten by a tick? What is the protocol? Should they go to their doctor? And if they can't get to a doctor, should they go to a pharmacist? What would you recommend?
I think the best is when you get first bitten by the tick, try to remove it following the instruction within the 24 hours, as soon as possible. As I said, and we're going to emphasize that, is not all tick carry Borrelia. And this tick need to be attached. Infected tick has said more than 24 hours to be infected. If you remove it quickly, yes, the probability of getting Lyme disease Borrelia is extremely low. If not, you can go to your GP or the pharmacist or any hospital healthcare system, visit them, they can give you some instruction.
Okay. Let me see. There's so many questions. I'm trying to go through all of these.
I can just add something to that.
Go ahead, Kirsten.
So the INSPQ or Quebec Public Health Institute creates a map every year where regions that are considered very high risk for Lyme disease, in those regions you can go to a pharmacist, and if you fit certain criteria, they may be able to give you a post-exposure prophylactic antibiotic in order to limit the chances that if the tick was infected, you do contract that disease. So regions that are in the Estrie, Montérégie, Outaouais regions, if you do have a tick bite, you can definitely go to a pharmacist and they may be able to help you out. Elsewhere in Canada, there's different regulations related to that. I think Ontario is province-wide. I'm not 100% certain, but there are certain things that if you really can't get to a doctor, a pharmacist may be able to help you in the meantime.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right, because I'm just talking about large, because include the rest of Canada, because each one have the
Okay. Now, Kirsten, you mentioned earlier about if you get bitten by a tick or you find a tick on you, save the tick. So we did get a question from Janet Robertson specifically asking, where would you take your captured tick to be examined? Like, where does it...
So when you go to the doctor with your captured tick, first of all, the doctor can send the tick voluntarily to our passive surveillance, where we receive those voluntary submissions, and we're able to identify what tick species it is. So, and they receive that information within 2 days, I think, is the turnaround time, where a doctor will receive the knowledge of whether it was a black-legged tick or not right away and be able to start suggesting certain things for their patient or determining what are the next steps. Us on our end, once we receive those ticks, we do test all of those ticks. So we are then aware of if it's infected, what tick species it was, and it gives us a lot better information with a lot more detail in order to create those risk maps, in order to figure out where populations are located. And it's pretty similar in other provinces and in the US as well.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So not competing with the
No.
INSPP, but we work tight with you guys. We also receive some tick. This is most of the one they attach to animal, cat, companion animals. So as I said at the beginning through the vector net, they send it to us. We pay for the transport, and we dissect them also. Right? Do the identification, we dissect, and we put them in culture, focusing on those 5 pathogens I mentioned. And we can, anyway, I don't say it's a dead end, but we can always send back the results also of the tick, if they're infected or not, to the veterinarian or someone who sent it to us. So I talked to also Karen TVR, also I'm going to upload the laboratory the santé publique Québec, because so far we collect a lot of information the past 3 years of funding we received from the MI4 and the MSC Foundation. And we would like to merge the data and see how Quebec could benefit also from the data we collect so far.
Okay. So Kirsten, you talked earlier about insect repellents. So here's a couple of questions. One from Glenn Barrett, who's asking whether non-chemical products have been shown to deter or repel ticks. And a second question from Aptin Kanbagi, who wants to know if home remedies can help to keep off ticks. He read that boiling water with 6 lemon juices and spraying it to our skins would ward off ticks. Any home remedies that might work?
So all of those more non-chemical, other than the oil of lemon eucalyptus, which there have been scientific studies that have demonstrated that there is a deterrent for ticks. A lot of those home remedies or essential oils or different things like that have not been studied in a sort of like clear scientific study. So from our perspective, we can't suggest them because it's hard for us to demonstrate the evidence. However, people have anecdotal evidence that these things, these different measures may help, but that's why we suggest using either those different chemical deterrents such as DEET or icaridin or picaridin, or the oil of lemon eucalyptus, or I'm also pretty sure Naturapel has been studied, but I'm pretty sure on that search tool on that CDC website that they do have the studies associated with those times you need to reapply and when the study has been conducted. But that's why I said it's on personal preferences of, do you want to have a insect repellent where there's a lot of studies that have looked at the effects not only to humans but the ticks or not?
All right. So I'm going to group these next 2 questions together as well. Shelly Cath is asking if we really need to worry about ticks if we live in an urban setting. And Maria Pacheco is asking, is it possible to have ticks in a backyard garden that has only flowers, no grass?
I can speak to the urban setting. So there have been ticks that have been found in urban settings, because what can tend to happen is in those sort of green spaces or forested areas on the island, it makes it that all the animals and birds and ticks are congregated into one specific location. For example, in Toronto, the Rouge Valley is known to have a lot of ticks in it. In Quebec, there's certain more urban areas where ticks have been found in parks, where you wouldn't really expect them to be there, but migratory birds have brought them in. So that's why I said, even if it's you're just outside in your backyard, it's still really beneficial to do a tick check. It's very fast and it's a very good preventative measure because we're never really certain when a bird is going to be flying over and resting or whether a mouse is going to be running across your backyard if you live in a suburban area. So it's things to think about. They're not as frequent as if you would be in a suburban or a rural area, but it doesn't mean that there's no ticks located in those urban centers.
Okay. I'm just going to add on top of that. Also, we mentioned it previously due to global warming. So most of these animals are also coming close to us, coming to the particular name also of the disease. I don't want to bring all this up, but we're focusing on ticks right now. Kirsten mentioned it also, the birds, the mouse, all the stuff can be also moving from their usual habitat and come close to us. If you take all those stuff, just keep in mind also really the global warming that push most of these vector reservoir out of the usual habitat to the city.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So speaking of gardening, we did receive another question earlier, I think also from Janet Robertson. I'll put this one to you, Kirsten. She's wondering whether there are protocols in place at gardening shops to prevent the spread of ticks. Are gardening shop retailers on the lookout for tick-infected plants?
So in gardening centers specifically, I don't think there would be ticks in those plants, given that ticks really need that humid leaf litter environment. So it depends on where you're located, if it's deciduous trees or conifers. But they really need that high humidity environment, above 80% humidity in order to survive. Otherwise, they're just going to dry up and die. So they're not really in that environment in those gardening centers. There is to say that scientists are looking at different plants, that they're studying different plants that maybe can deter ticks and things like that. So once again, researchers are looking at all sorts of different avenues that can be used, especially on personal properties or more like backyard settings that are more than just the certain things we know, like mowing your lawn and things like that, in order to help create additional deterrence or additional preventative strategies moving forward.
Okay, great. Dr. Ndao, the next two questions. I was waiting. I was going to ask you about vaccines. I was waiting for someone to do so. So both Nadine Lessard and Susie Vodopevich have actually both written in to ask whether there will be a vaccine to prevent Lyme disease in the future.
Big hope. You have to think big. And I absolutely believe that we can design a vaccine against Lyme disease. Might take time, but it's coming. That can be through some recombinant antigen that also the CDC, FDA approved for diagnosed, but especially through the EV, the extra vesicle that the pathogen released in the body. That is now well known. Through that system, we can isolate those and sequence them and get looking for the, of course, for vaccines going to take years, but as we make vaccine for other pathogen, and as also we're working on the mRNA vaccine through also the D2R we receive at McGill, I think there is a big opportunity and big hope that we can come with a solution of vaccine that might maybe fix Lyme disease issue, and that will be made, let's say, in Canada, not only at McGill, but in Canada. Yes, there is a hope of vaccine. We're working through that in parallel of the diagnosis we're doing. We're trying to culture, as I mentioned, through the vector net, and we're going to come with something. Good tool to diagnose the disease, and better way maybe to prevent the disease.
All right. So some encouraging news, and we'll have you back on as soon as you have that ready to get to a market. Sorry, Kirsten, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can add that there actually was a vaccine for Lyme disease in the early 2000s. So that optimism is really high because it has been in the past. It was just at that time there wasn't enough demand for it. So they discontinued the vaccine, which now, had we known, would have been really beneficial.
Okay, but dumb question, but didn't they keep the recipe?
things change through time, so it wouldn't be the same things that would be necessary today that they would have been at that point.
Okay, that's why I'm not in science. I asked this question.
Anyway, and I think also he's not designing a vaccine for Lyme. We have to keep in mind it's not only one pathogen transmitted by the tick. Yes, most of those are for Lyme. If you can make a cocktail vaccine, like what we're developing has the multiplex diagnosis, one-stop shopping, that might be the best. Ideally, at least including 2 to 3 pathogens. This is happen for viral infection that you not get only one single vaccine for one single pathogen. But if you can make a cocktail vaccine, that might be extremely useful. As Kirsten said, there is a molecule that people use for vaccine, but they drop it off. But with the advent of the mRNA vaccine, there is a lot of tools that people can use. And I think we're working with NRC, we're working through the McGill, through the D2R. I think we're going to come with a solution. I can't talk too much about it, but we're working on it.
Okay, well, that is, again, still encouraging. So here's a couple of specific questions. I'm not sure, Kirsten, if you're able to answer this in your capacity with the NISPQ, but there's a question from Dr. Raquel Alois. She's asking if there are any areas within the Montreal area with higher concentrations of ticks bearing Lyme disease. And I'm afraid what you might answer, but go ahead.
All I can say is that there are certain regions, like certain parks, let's say on Montreal, that have a greater tick presence. That's what I can say.
Yeah. I was worried you were going to say the West Island where I live, because I have heard that it is an increased risk there, but I guess it's more trees and more forests there, correct?
I think in certain cases, especially the areas that do have those higher infection rates are informed, and they do put in place communication strategies, especially at those parks. So if you see a panel with respect to, oh, there's ticks here, then just make sure to put in place all those different preventative measures.
Okay. The next question, a similar, I guess, theme from Dominique Gualtieri, is wondering if there's a heat map that exists that would show where ticks are located across Canada and how far north have the ticks moved. Do we know that?
I can speak first for Quebec, and if you, Dr. Ndao, know more for Canada, I can speak a little bit towards it. But we actually just published a map looking at established tick populations for province-wide. It was using very specific indicators where we can see that a larger amount of ticks have been located here throughout multiple years, either from human surveillance or they're from active or passive surveillance. And we can see that mostly the southern regions of Quebec are most affected, as we would know based off of where Lyme disease cases are prevalent. But we can also see that there's established tick populations located in further regions north, west, and east. So located in that Abitibi-Témiscamingue region, the Saguenay region, and the Gaspésie region. These places are most likely all have established tick populations because of that migratory bird movement, because they've been brought to these areas and then further established. So for Quebec-wise, we just put out those maps that are really, really cool. And it'll show you specifically municipalities where these are considered established tick population areas. Federally, Canada-wide, Public Health Agency of Canada does receive the information from each province every year where we consider our high risk or endemic Lyme disease areas. And they use that information to then create a map as well. I don't know how accessible the map is, but I know that they use this information as well to just have a overview, especially in provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, who are getting so hard hit by tick-borne diseases.
Okay.
Yeah, the Canada.ca surveillance, you can see all those information that include Victoria, Winnipeg, Regina, Halifax, St. John's. Now, I can even say Montreal is there also.
Great.
Montreal, Toronto. You can see the map and you can enjoy them. It's harshly they say where they export the, and I think the recent things they put there is 2023. They don't have the 2024, But people can visit it. You type it, you can get all the information.
Right. Okay, perfect. So I guess go to Google and you'll find the information. So we're almost out of time. Let me just go back to another question that's just coming from Gabrielle Schneck. She had a follow-up questions for you, Kirsten. And I guess maybe it's a way to maybe end this. She's asking if you could just talk a little bit more in detail about how one would check their body for ticks. Do you check behind your ears? What about your hair? And then again, how would you remove them, and what do you do with the tick when you have it? Like you put it in a bag? Like, so maybe again, just for the benefit of our viewers, maybe just walk us through the process when you get back from a day in the park.
Mm-hmm. So what you'll do is when you're doing a tick check, it will include every part of your body. They can find places you didn't even know were there. So really checking behind your ears, they really like armpits, they really like everywhere. And so if you can't fully check your body, then it's really good to have somebody else help you check your back, check the back of your head using a mirror to try to do it yourself. They also really like to go, especially in kids, you tend to find ticks on the top of their heads because they're at that sort of vegetation height. So they can be found there. But if you run your hands through, or if you look in a mirror again, you should be able to locate them. You will feel a small bump. Even if it's really small, you can typically tell if you're doing it every day, you can typically tell when there's a difference from one day to the next. If you've localized the tick, you're going to want to use very sharp-ended tweezers. You want to go as close to the skin as possible. With the tweezers, latch on to the head area and pull straight up in one sweep. This is the way that we are least likely to irritate the ticks. So it's really the best way. And then afterwards, you can put the tick in a baggie or a very well-closed baggie. Normally, I prefer a closed container, knowing they're not going to get out of a baggie. And you can put it in the freezer. So that's why certain symptoms can tend to, if the tick was infected, can appear 3 to 30 days after a tick bite. So if I had a tick bite on me, I would remove my tick and then leave it in my freezer for a month. And then if you don't need the tick, well, it's okay, you can get rid of it. But otherwise, you would have it need be. And they do freeze after a while and will die. They're not good in very cold temperatures for long periods of time. Otherwise, you can put like a very strong alcohol and they'll die as well. But usually the freezer is the better option.
Okay. So maybe the last question, we have about 60 seconds left. Dr. Ndao, I'll just leave the final word to you. You've talked a lot about the scientific advances being made in the research laboratories, which is very encouraging. I know you also work in a hospital. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, are our hospital systems in Quebec, in Canada, in North America, really equipped to handle this uptick in ticks in terms of dealing with patients?
I think yes. They have the tool, but I think they have all the background also information that clinician needs to help the patients. So, and now even the population, everyone is getting informed because people get the information through the web. They can get it through the LSPQ, from Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada. But when it comes to the hospital, of course, the information we said, I'm just going to repeat it. They have to tell when they was exposed, also if they have the tick, if they can really confirm they have a tick bite, and the duration also, and the GP, the clinician, will take it from there. So take the blood. We have to keep in mind that also, if it's less than 4 weeks, even if you take the antibody, the blood, looking for antibody, the test might be negative. So you have to wait 4 weeks onward to see the development of the immunoglobulin, IgG. And again, it's the 2 tests that people have to use: ELISA and immunoblood Western blot for confirmatory testing. There is some new assay developed for PCR, but as I said, we're working through the vector net to come with something even easier that people can even get through the pharmacies.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Ndao. And unfortunately, I only got through maybe about half the questions that have come in. There's been a lot of interest in this topic, but that just about wraps up the time we do have today. Before we bring the webcast to a close, I'd like to remind you that this video will be available at this very same link soon after our recording ends. So feel free to watch it again for reference or share with others who may not have been able to tune in live. I would, of course, like to extend my deep gratitude to our two guests, Dr. Momar Ndao of the McGill University Health Center and Kirsten Crandall of the Institut National de Santé du Québec for joining me today and teaching us everything we need to know about Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses. An incredibly interesting and fascinating conversation. So thank you both for all of your great insight and tips. And thank you again to our worldwide audience of McGill alumni and friends for tuning in today. Please continue to stay tuned to your McGill email and social media feeds throughout the summer for more updates on exciting online and in-person programming. Until then, please be well and stay safe. Thank you.